Hey everyone, welcome to this month's Hero Lab Insiders webinar. And we're going to take a little bit of a kind of special edition here with the monthly webinars, because obviously when this is going out, this is during a time that is very, very overwhelming and crazy for coronavirus. And obviously we are in a time period where a lot of people are unable to train, they cannot get in the gym, and I rightfully so have gotten hundreds of messages on social media or through my email or through just calls and stuff like that about what do we do to handle this time, but then also how do we safely get back to training for everybody, for the gymnasts, for the coaches, for everybody involved, and how do we also try to, make sure we have our head wrapped around the safe reintroduction, but also still maintaining our ability to go towards good performance gains. So this lecture is obviously going to be more around extended time periods of off because of coronavirus, but I think it applies to a lot of other things. And so that's why I wanted to dive into it, because there are definitely other times where injuries happen or athletes want to take a break, or there's, things that come up with the family and they're away for a couple months or vacations or a month or things like that. So there's a lot of other reasons besides the once in a lifetime, hopefully coronavirus, that people would have this much time off from training. But I think it's good that we dive into some of these things so that we can get practical solutions for how to handle this now, but then we can also get some ideas and templates in place for how do we handle this in the future should a situation come up with an athlete or with a family that goes away or something like that. So we're going to get started here and just chat a little bit first. I will tell you in advance, I tried to put a lot of hilarious GIFs into this presentation because it's a sobering topic given coronavirus, but this is one of my all-time favorite gymnastics GIFs. So sometimes we are not really, choice-based with this. So like I just said, we have coronavirus, we have injuries, we have athletes want to take a break, we have family factors, other things, right? But the fact of the matter is that regardless of that, this is a very different situation than if somebody has to take a couple days off because they rolled their ankle, or, something happens where they're sick for a few days and they're back the next week, or, family stuff comes up, they're gone for a weekend. We're talking about extended time periods away from training. And so, anywhere between 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 to more weeks off. So we have to address these situations very differently. And I think this is one of the hardest times that we really need to go with what the science says. We cannot go with what the cultural assumptions are or the cultural pressures are. And I think that this comes down in season. Sometimes it comes down to where meet pressures come up, whereas you have this meet and you want to get back for this timeline because it's some big event or some sort of meet that it is, or in this situation, it's if someone has prolonged periods of time off, they want to get back because they want to get new skills. They don't want to lose their progressions and levels. They want to move up, whatever it is. And I think that you cannot go by what the culture promotes sometimes, which is, that our gymnasts can defy the human physiology, and that gymnastics is so unique and different that we can take extra amounts of training load and we don't have to listen to, the recommendations from the medical field or the strength and conditioning field on workloads. I think that sometimes, we unfortunately fall into a trap of thinking that gymnastics is special, and we don't really respect the basic physiology. And sometimes that is hard because it comes with making some challenging decisions. But I think it's the most important thing we can do is look up for the athlete's health and safety. And obviously the long-term performance will be much better if we can safely get them back to training and make sure we get their chronic workload back up in a way that's promoting adaptation and not kind of pushing them downhill. So we're going to see a lot of graphics that we've used in other slides and some other lectures, but I really think they're important here for context. So we'll revisit the ones that are the most notable. Okay, number one, my always biggest first tip of advice is focus on what you can control, right? There's so many times, unfortunately, I think we really spend a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted energy on, oh, well, if this would have gone well, if we got diagnosed earlier with this injury, if, this thing didn't happen, or if, the sport didn't have these demands, or it wasn't this meet coming up. I think we spend too much time dwelling on the things that are out of our control when we should be focusing on things that, really are in our control. So you can't change other people. You can't change their choices, their attitudes. You can't change the inherent nature of how long a bone needs to heal, or how long the government says you're not allowed to gather in groups or things of that nature, right? You have to embrace that reality and deal with it, because the amount of time you waste there is really going to distort your ability to have a good plan moving forward. So with that being said, You must focus on the things that you can control, okay? So these are things that always pop into my mind for what I'm trying to teach athletes about, teach parents about, and teach myself about over to make sure I'm on the right path here. So one is the ability to maintain a workload when you are in that time off, okay? So in a situation here with coronavirus, there's a lot of things that we can still be giving our athletes to do that hopefully maintain some of that workload, as the research suggests can help reduce our total time back to injury. We can 100% try to control our attitude and our mindset. Now, I'm not saying that you won't have negative thoughts or frustrating thoughts, or the athlete won't have this frustrating thought of, man, why am I injured? Why is this taking so long? Or God, why can't we get back to training, or stuff like that. You need to have that rational optimism, it's called. You're allowed to have negative thoughts and negative assumptions and negative kind of like things that pop up into your head without your control. But whether those things linger and, you dwell on those things, or whether you reorientate yourself and say, I know this is hard. I know this is frustrating. I'm allowed to feel upset, but there are always things that I can do to improve or to get better or to move forward. So having a rational, optimistic mindset versus a pessimistic mindset is different, right? And rational optimism is very different than irrational optimism from Sean Akers' work. Irrational optimism is like blind rose-colored glasses, which is something we've talked about in other webinars. We do not want the delusional, everything's going to be fine, no big deal, this is okay, cheery all the time, because that's not really how the world works. So you have to kind of have that, yep, this is hard, this is challenging, it's going to be a very enormous challenge for all of us to get through, but we can do stuff to get there. So you can also influence the safe application of training loads. Okay, you can build programs, as we'll talk about, to make sure we're following the best available data. We can try to influence people's recovery practices to try to really educate them on how important sleep and recovery practices of hydration and nutrition, fueling yourself for performance, trying to have really good discipline around your time that you put into taking care of yourself. I think that those things make a massive difference in the long term of how somebody can get back into training smoothly, versus if we get back to training and it's kind of a shock to our system and we're really not sleeping enough, we're not eating well, we're not hydrating, we're not taking care of our outside stress, that doesn't allow our body to kind of recover between training practices, and we kind of trickle downhill faster. So the other thing we can absolutely control is how much we communicate with athletes, which is a big factor here for, what can we do? How are you feeling? How are things going? Do you want to talk about stuff? Do you need to tweak your planning? Is it just not going well and stuff like that? Because the reality is that we're going to have plans in place, but the application of those things are going to be highly individual and be very tricky to change based on a whole group. Okay. So you have to have a global plan, but you have to be willing and able to change those things kind of back and forth on the fly. Okay. So the second thing we'll talk about here, and this is something we've talked about before, but it's so important to try to maintain some sort of a workload, right? We know from other lectures, from Tim Gabbitt's work and some other, strength and conditioning researchers, that, there are really good concerns that we need to think about with acute to chronic workload ratios. And just a refresher, if you've never heard these terms, an acute workload is kind of the workload you do in 1 week. So how many routines you do, how many practices you do, how many turns you take, how many tumbling passes you take, how many pull-ups you do in a day, kind of stuff. How you average that week compared to the weeks before that. So if you have 1 week of training load, the acute load, right, and that's really, say 100 units. This is an arbitrary thing. But then the last 2 weeks, you've only done an average of 50 units, right? Well, that's doubling your workload, and you should start to be a little bit concerning, right? That doubling of workload is maybe a little bit aggressive. The research typically supports between 1.3 and 1.7 is kind of where we get our sweet spot, so to say, our 8.8 to 1.3, and then kind of 1.7 starts to get a little bit dicey. So what that in non-geeky words says is that we want to slowly increase the training load above what they're able to do, right? That overload capacity, but not so much that we start to negatively impact their ability to perform well and kind of handle that training load. So the research is, pretty good right now at explaining a lot of different things about this across many sports, but sudden unplanned spikes in acute load. So all of a sudden you throw a whole bunch of new drills at someone over a couple of days, or you just all of a sudden go on the hard surface, you make them do a ton of numbers. That is correlated with increased injury risk and drops in performance. Okay. So injury risk, not injury rate. It doesn't mean you're going to get hurt, but there's a higher risk. Okay. And then not intelligently building up to a chronic workload. So not really training hard when you're supposed to, and not, putting in the work you need to, is also correlated with those things. So with those things in mind, I've shown this in a couple other things I've done already, but this is such an important graph because this kind of demonstrates to the athletes of why they need to maintain that workload, right? So this was a multiple sports together from the Australian Institute of Sport in 2015. And essentially what they showed is that if you were able to maintain a fraction of your workload, it cut down the total number of weeks that it took to get you back to full training. Okay, so this was after an injury, right? But when they looked at the ability to maintain 30 to 40% of their workload, what they found is that it reduced their overall time to get back by 2 weeks. Okay, so if they were, doing something at home, a conditioning program, some sort of strength program around their injury, right? Being able to hop on a bike with, 3 out of your 4 arms or legs if you have an injury, and still maintaining some of that cardiovascular fitness, still doing some core, still doing some basics, something like that that's safely appropriate for their medical condition. They were able to shave down some weeks here. And I think this goes perfectly well for what many people are probably dealing with, which is, in-house, quarantine or not being able to go to the gym, is that you're not limited by injury. You can probably do a lot more than you think. And I think it really comes down to educating the athlete and teaching them to get motivated, which is the beauty and the art of coaching, right? Which is teaching them like, hey, I know you still have goals. So if you can just do this home program and kind of make it fun and go out for walks or jogs with your family and maybe do some flexibility stuff at home and have sort of a structure, you're going to be so much happier when you get back to the gym because it's not going to feel as bad, okay? Versus just letting it slide for 6 weeks or 8 weeks and then coming back and having everybody be really slow and really cranky, and everyone kind of hits a frustration point there. So how you actually motivate those athletes is really what you need to do as a coach, is explain to them about, what are their favorite gymnasts doing right now when they're at home, right? What do their favorite gymnasts do when they're injured? Do they mope around and be upset about it? Or do they say, this is something I need to just face and deal, and I'm gonna do the most that I can? Like, I know so many great Olympic and college gymnasts that preach that when you're injured or when you're at home and you can't really be at the gym, there's still so much you can do. So follow some of those, idols that they have and talk to them about what they would do. I think a lot of people resonate more with looking up to their idols and looking up to inspirational people versus a coach telling them they have to do a program. So the other thing I would say on that too is map it to their goals, right? Some people want to be with their friends, have fun, right? They just want to go to the gym and have fun. If that's the case, say, oh, that's great. So your ability to, get back into the gym safely and train with your friends and enjoy it is dependent on your fitness level. So if you can be a little bit, more fit when home, you can get back in the gym more easily with your friends. If they have a goal to get a new skill, okay, well, maintaining these things and, your leg strength, your flexibility, your cardio, that will help you be able to do more turns to get new skills. And if you want to say move up in level to get more skills to move up to the next level, all those kind of things, you have to make them context specific. It's not about what you want as a coach or as a parent or as whatever. It's about what they want and trying to help them understand and paint that picture of how what they do now bridges to what they're going to get down the road. So that's something that I've been trying with, and I would definitely recommend everybody else do. Okay, this is a newer paper from Tim Gabbett, and it's a really, really applicable paper that just came out. Okay, so he talks a lot about these things, the floor, the ceiling, and how much time you have to get there, right? So the floor is kind of an athlete's level of capacity or fitness or the amount of work they can do, right? So when things are smooth and going well, it might be 5 days of hard training per week, varying between super high intensity or low intensity or whatever it is. But 5 days of training, right, that might be where they're at for the floor in terms of doing skills and basics and some sort of physical preparation. The ceiling might be a high level competition with 2 days back to back, right? So you have to, get to that meet, do a touch day, do whatever, and then the next day wake up and compete again. For some athletes, it's just like a state championship or a regional championship. So you're trying to bridge the time to get them to that higher level of capacity, doing full routines, doing their hardest skills, doing their upgrades, performing under pressure, handling all that kind of stuff. You're trying to say, okay, if I have 6 months to get them there, how do I bridge this gap slowly, right? And then some risky things that come up, and I guess goes back to Tim's original work with the workload ratios, is that if we maybe don't plan our time well, and we crunch time too much, where we push routines too far off, we push our conditioning off, the spike in time, if we half the time to get there, there's a significant increase in injury risk, right? And so what this comes down to here now for dealing with our quarantine situation is that if our goal is to get them back to doing the skills they did last year and doing all of their fitness and doing all their cardio and stuff, well, their floor is probably very, very low, as we'll talk about in the next slide. So we can't expect them to get to the same level of a ceiling in terms of the end of our preseason or the end of our off season because of, where they're at right now. The forced time off, unfortunately, has dropped our floor. So we can't expect such a high ceiling, right? And now over here on the right, and this is kind of a blessing of what we're going to probably be working with, is if our competition season is cut short to an injury, or if our competition season is cut short because it's forced upon us because of the government, we may have extended time off, unfortunately, but we actually might start our preseason much earlier, right? So the way that it's kind of panning out now here in the States, and for many other people, I think that we're going to get a very low amount of time for the floor, but what's going to happen is we're actually going to gain a lot of time in what would normally be our off-season training. So usually we get about 3 months, but because the season has been canceled with competition, we're probably going to get 4 months back. And so what that does is it allows us to have more time to get up to that ceiling that we want, but we have to be careful, because just because we have more time, we have to use it appropriately. It doesn't mean that we have, as soon as we can jump back, we can dive into some of these really hard things. We have to respect this all the way. And I think this next slide will show it really well. Okay, if we can back up the preseason, which is what we're talking about here, and we can build them up to maybe a higher level of working out at home and getting some of that floor to raise, maybe if we can actually get them over these 4 months to a higher floor than they would normally have, right? So, this would be maybe our typical 2.5 month summer. This is maybe our 4 month summer, and we can actually increase our ability to get ready for the preseason. If we treat these next 4 months appropriately and we do our homework, we actually might have a better time getting to what we want, which is our high level of routines and stuff like that. Okay. The situation we're dealing with now that we have to be careful about is that if we were to do nothing right now, okay, just sit on the couch for 6 weeks and then come back and go super hard, well, we're trying to get somebody from a basement level. So they're below their typical average level of fitness. We're trying to get them back up to the same level of summer conditioning. And that spike is going to be kind of risky. Okay, so that's what we want to be careful of right now. But if we're doing these things correct, if we're having somebody who can maintain some of their workload at home, we safely respect getting back into the gym, and we plan accordingly, which is a big part of this lecture, we can actually raise the floor up and get someone to an above level of performance, right? So maybe we can use this terrible situation as a slight blessing, have a longer preseason, plan out a little bit more carefully for a longer time period, but really work on getting above our fitness level that we typically would have in the May or June here in the States before we get back into summer training. Maybe we can actually get this to be way higher than we want, and it will be a blessing in disguise. Okay. So what do we do here, right? So I've kind of already alluded to it, right? But we're trying to do maybe some strength conditioning programs at home. We're trying to maybe do some accessory programs. Maybe there's extra time. They have a half hour to do an extra, some flexibility or some core work that they normally couldn't do in the busy practice of a gym when they have skill work to do, right? Maybe we can build programs around the limitations we have, whether those are space at home or equipment at home, or if someone's injured, they can't use their right ankle, but they can use their arms and their core. Maybe you can do your best to build around their programs as much as you can. And that will be significantly more helpful for them than just doing nothing, right? So really be creative, be innovative, talk to your athletes with what they have, try to make programs that are, kind of outside the mold of your typical boring grunt work of just basic physical preparation. Make them circuits, make them cardio, make them to music, make them to, do them with your friends online, do them together. Like all these things can kind of, be done in maybe a virtual setting where you're not reliant on someone being in the gym. And if they're an injury point of view and you're having someone who's coming back after a long injury, get them involved in the gym still, make them come to part of the practice, be a part of the group. Don't just kind of distance yourself and say, okay, you go in the corner and do this. Okay. Because like we saw, even maintaining 20 to 40% makes a massive difference. Okay, this is a really, really important thing to talk about. We need to reset our mindset here. I think this is honestly globally for all of gymnastics. I really think we do a poor job of respecting the science here, but especially when we're coming back off of an extended long period break, whether that's a 2-month family vacation or that's a forced quarantine or whether that's an injury, right? When you look at the science of recovery, we have to understand that you cannot do multiple hard days in a row and expect the body to keep up. That is not how we're designed. Contrary to what everyone says in gymnastics, that we can just ignore science. That's not how gymnasts work, okay? We have to rotate light, medium, and heavy and off days. And if you're not doing that, I urge you to really think about what the science says and don't go just based off the cultural myth that gymnasts can just be robots who take a beating every day and they should just be quiet and keep working hard. That is so ridiculous. And I don't think anybody here would go for 40-mile runs every single day in a row and feel great and not complain about it, okay? So there's unique parts to gymnastics, but it's not different. We're not like different species that we can't do the normal adaptation curves, okay? And I highlight this paper because this is one of the only things I've seen done in gymnastics for this exact thing. They took 15 level 7 to 10 gymnasts. They were about average 13, so between 12 and 15 years old, or 11 and 15 years old. And they put them through physical testing when they warmed up and did all like their physical prep work when they were fresh, right? So pull-ups, leg lifts, press handstands, I think a sprint test, and maybe some broad jumping tests. And they got those as a baseline. They put them through an extremely hard training practice, which is honestly a normal practice, probably of what most people would do. And then they measured how long it took them to get back to their baseline level of fitness, right? The ability to do the same number of pull-ups and rope climbs and stuff like that when they were fresh, because that's a very gymnastic specific measurement of what we're looking at. And what they found is that due to soreness and mental fatigue or just muscular fatigue, it took almost all of the gymnasts 2 full days to get back to full recovery where they could accept a heavy training load again. Okay. So it doesn't mean they couldn't train the next day. It just means that they had to be careful about the intensity. They maybe did a medium day or a lighter day the next day. So I think what this means is that it's the first thing that I've seen that kind of actually shows that gymnasts need modified programs, and you can't go on hard surfaces every day. And a lot of good coaches do this, but I still think it's cultural, fallacy in our environment to just push, and just, kind of accept that they should just be tougher and go through. Like there's a fine line between intelligently challenging an athlete and pushing them over their limit to get the most out of them, and being mean and risking injury. Okay, so this showed that almost none of the athletes were completely back to baseline 24 hours a day, the next day. So think about a 5 p.m., you get home at 8 p.m., and you have to kind of go back to practice the next day at 5. That's under 24 hours, right? That's not a full day of rest. Okay, most of the athletes were in the 48-hour window, so from a Monday to a Wednesday, and a few of the athletes that were a little bit older, I believe, they had to go a full 72 hours because of how hard they were training. So very important stuff to consider, and I think what it means for us is that if we don't make an intelligent plan beforehand, we're going to be setting people up for disaster because they're going to be tired. And especially at this time, coming off a long period, they might be at a significantly higher risk of injury than ever before because of how much they're going to feel rusty and kind of get the gears moving again. So that is very much in line with other literature when you look at it too, many other sports, many other research bodies. So after reading this study about 4 years ago, I really overthought, how I was looking at some of my day-to-day programming. I was doing a lot of really hard days in a row, even if it wasn't intentional. And I had to really think about my rationale for what I was doing this. I was saying, is this because this is what I was taught and what everybody else does? Or does the science and my athletes' communication respect this? Okay. Very important slide. I just have to put it up again if you haven't already heard the tone in my voice. Gymnastics is unique. It is not different. Please do not come back to practice or have an athlete come back after a long 2-month break with their family. Just let it be. It is what it is. Don't ask ridiculousness of your gymnast. Don't wage psychological warfare on gymnasts who have gone for a long time and say, well, now that you're back, we're going to go super hard, right? We're going to crush you on the first 2 days, because that is only going to lead to mental and emotional unhappiness. Okay. Please follow the science of what I'm suggesting here with workloads in Tim's work and periodization and stuff like that. Do not follow, well, this coach does this and they made an Olympian, and don't follow, well, this athlete does it, why can't this athlete? Don't compare athletes. Don't follow myths. Don't assume things about people. Follow science, follow communication, and follow plans. Okay, this is the paper I was alluding to with Tim, which I think is just another piece of supportive science. So the ratio workloads, right? We've seen this before, but when that sudden week-long spiked really high compared to the other 2 weeks, there was an elevated injury risk, okay, risk of injury when we were in that 1.5 to 2.0, okay, which that means is that that's a healthy dose over what they did last week in practical terms. That's pushing it a little bit harder, but not too much, right? Going from, half hour of moderately intense conditioning to maybe 45 minutes of moderate intense conditioning in circuits, or going from a half hour of moderate intensity to a half hour of more higher intensity, making the exercise a little harder, adding a little bit more weight, requiring more repetitions, having them do 7 of each tumbling pass on a softer surface versus 5 on the week before, or having them do 45 minutes of a pretty dense working all the time event versus the week before. Maybe you did 45 minutes with a lot more talking and drills and breakdowns, so it wasn't so many numbers. Okay, so that's what we're practically talking about here. We're not talking about something too sciencey, but they also, again, as we always notice, is that under on this curve here, if we didn't push it hard enough and we didn't actually increase the training load over time, that was also concerning for risk of injury, right? So that tells us that we want to train intelligently. It's okay to train hard. We want to push them a little bit, but we have to be smart. We have to use critical thinking. We have to use our logic. We can't get emotional and just say, well, you're not doing it right, so you have 50 more, because that's how we get an overuse injury, okay? Okay, this is kind of like what we're looking at for when we're applying this, right? That initial, goes back to that 48 hours we're talking about. And that initial 28 to 48 hours after a heavy training load, your capacity to handle things is lower. So then you recover. And if you do it right and you don't apply a training load too soon and you give them a proper recovery environment, they kind of pop up on top. And this is how we safely build to an increased chronic workload over the course of, 4 weeks or so. Okay, try to really slowly think about these things. And I'm just practically applying these to what we're talking about with our coaching staff, what I'm talking about with other people that I consult with. The next 4 weeks when we get back to training are going to have to be a lot of drills, a lot of basics, okay, reviewing technique, softer surfaces, foam pits, if you can, using spotting or other spotting tools for you, like spotting belts and stuff like that. It's going to be much lower intensity probably, which means you can increase the volume, right? You can do more repetitions on a tumble track. 10 tumbling passes on a tumble track is definitely not the same as 10 on the floor. So you can increase the volume, but you're going to have to go slower and making sure that you're not over pushing the intensity too soon. So I think that we'll talk about it, but this is when you should really be thinking about what drills do we want to do? What complexes do we want to do? What time do we have? How can we build in more general work and not so much specific high intensity, high force impact, because the joints will not be ready to handle it. The rate limiter will be the elbows, the knees, the ankles, the shoulders. Those things are going to bark at you if you push too soon. Okay. So you have to kind of think about amount of time you have off. You have to really repivot the way you think, right? Or pivot the way you think to how long is this really going to take? Because it's going to be a much more slower, gradual increase. And we can work out, we can have fun, we can push it, but we need a much longer time. Like I said, getting from the floor to the ceiling is going to be much more slower of a steep of a curve, because we don't want to push things too hard and spike that training load. Okay, so mentally, the gymnasts, when they come back, are ready to go, right? I know this after an injury, right? Somebody gets cleared by a doctor, they haven't had pain in a month, and the boot came off a month ago, they did their rehab, they did their PT, and they're like, let me at it. They just want to go nuts. They want to tumble, they want to swing, they want to do all of it, right? And mentally and like in their energy levels are through the roof, and that's so awesome, right? And you're really excited for that. But this is where it's so important on education that you have to tell them that physically their injured body part and also the rest of their body is probably not ready for that fifth gear that they want to go into. And I've seen far too many athletes who get the quote unquote clear and they go way too hard and they set themselves back up pretty quick, and they are very, very frustrated and very, very overwhelmed with it. So you have to kind of educate them from a very early point of view that, like, hey, we're in the honeymoon phase, I call it, right? You're going to have these 3 to 4 weeks where like you feel amazing and you want to do nothing but go more and more and more. And you have to say, like, we're going to go 1 week here, then another week here, and then another week here. And often with an injury, it's, I say, we have 2 weeks of this program, then we're going to bump up to 2 weeks of this program. And if you don't have symptoms, that's what we want, right? You shouldn't be sore or in pain all the time. You shouldn't be drained all the time. Selectively, we want some of that, but not all the time, okay? So like I said, I'm trying to communicate over with them, because they're going to be very frustrated. They're going to be like, why won't you let me go? Or why can't I just do it? And you have to say, the skills are going to come back. It's going to be hard. It's going to be very a lot of patience of you. But in the long run, it's more important to get you back permanently, right, than quickly, right? I'd rather you get back at a longer time period and be back for good than rush this process back and have you get a flare up, or have you, get another injury because you're not really physically ready enough, or have you start to dip into the gas tank too much and now you're super burnt out and you're tired and you're not really having a good performance. So again, try to get back permanently, not quickly. Okay, and this is kind of the opposite of what happens when we do into that well, is that if we don't get that training load back fully to recover. So say on their side, they don't sleep enough, they're not fueling for performance, they're not hydrating, they're not, doing their schoolwork on time to get balanced, or they're not, just giving themselves enough time between bouts. They start too early and it drips them down farther, versus what we saw in the first one, which is building them up, right? This could also be on our side of applying another training load too soon. Maybe we put them on that 24 hours kind of study we talked about. We apply another heavy training load too far, their body's not ready for it, and they slide downhill even more. And if we keep disrespecting the body's natural cycles of training, what happens is we get overfunction, right? Overreaching, right? Non-functional overreaching, which is overtraining, which is moodiness and cranky joints, and I don't want to be here, and a little bit of a diva attitude, and just like, I wish I could, I just have no energy, I feel dead, I can't keep my eyes open, right? That's overtraining. Okay, number 4 here, which we've alluded to a little bit, is we're going to have to over-educate the athletes and the parents, right? This is going to be a very different thing than what they're used to, especially for athletes that are used to kind of like, a quick ankle roll, it's a few weeks off, or I tweaked my shoulder and I just can't do bars or something like that. When you have extended time periods off, it's a big mental shift for the athletes. They have to really appreciate, like, wow, man, I was 4 weeks. This stinks. Or 8 weeks. This stinks. I don't like this. This is frustrating. And so you have to educate them on how on the way back when they come in, it's going to be basics. It's going to be technique. They're going to go back through their level, so to speak. They're going to start with their basic things and move their way up with a lot less skills than they want to do and much more grunt work, right? They have to go back and kind of recondition their brain and their body to get ready to handle these long 4-hour or 3-hour training practices that they're doing. And in my opinion, I think that most of the time the gymnasts kind of have trust with their coach and they understand that. But it's the parents who sometimes don't really get that. They say, well, she's not in pain or he's not in pain, or, all the other athletes are doing this. Why can't you do that? And you have to really stay ahead of that proactively and say, like, I know that you're going to want to go, and you're going to see other kids doing different things. And, well, this athlete had an ankle sprain and they were back in 2 weeks, or this athlete's got a sore back and they got to compete in this meet. But you have to say everyone is different. Every skill profile is different. Every type of athlete is different. And that we never go based on an arbitrary number. We go based on what the science tells us, and then we go based on communication. Okay, I really can't stress this enough too. We've talked about planning a lot, but after a long period of time off, it is so important to have a plan for your gym. If you don't have a plan for your gym about how you're going to approach getting back into things, it is like running around with a chicken with your head cut off, right? You just can't wrap your head around how to help everybody because you're constantly thinking about, what do we do next? What are we doing for conditioning? What did we do yesterday for conditioning? How many skills did we do? What drills should we do? What skills are we working today? Like, there's so many things that have to be set in place for things to go smooth. And definitely during the off period, if it's a forced off period, like what we're having with a quarantine, or if someone has an injury, or if somebody has the gym can't be open for a little time, whatever it is, as a gym and as an athlete, you should be thinking about all the things for the schedule when you come back. And so right now I encourage everybody, if they're in a time period that's off, you should be having staff meetings like crazy with your employers and with your employees and other coaches and people like that, saying, okay, say we have 4 more weeks of this. What are we going to do? How many weeks are we going to have before we want to get back into our skill and routine training, right? And that might be pushed back more than normal, and you might have to sacrifice some time in season to get people ready. But how many weeks do we have? How many days per week are we going to be in the gym training? Are we on a summer schedule? Are we still on an old schedule? What are the levels going to look like? How many days are we doing light, medium, or hard? How many strength days are we going to do? What's in our strength plan? How many events are we going to do per day? Which coaching staff is available for what events? Like, you have to plan all these things. If you don't have these things in mind, when you get back, it is a nightmare, right? So maybe you can't answer all of these questions, but a lot of these things you can. Okay, and this is from another lecture I gave, but these are other examples, right? 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, all the way up to 6 days. You can kind of pick from this graph. I really hope no one's training 7 days a week, because that's ludicrous. So you should have from this graph somewhere that you kind of fall into place. Maybe like, I don't really know yet. It might be 5, it might be 4. We don't know what the coaching staff's going to look like. We have a camp coming in, so some weeks we might have to sacrifice a day that, those little kids running around. But plan for these situations hypothetically, and then kind of build a program around what it might look like, and just kind of start having the conversation about how many days you're going to be in the gym, because this alone will help you organize when you're doing strength, when you're doing skills, when you can do cardio, and you can kind of build up a home program on the off program to mimic one of these things. If I know that an athlete has to get back to 5 days of training, with 2 of them being really heavy, if I have them in a clinic injury, I'm having them do their PT program 2 days per week for the medium days, but I'm trying to build them pretty hard training programs around their injury as much as they can, right? Doing stuff on a bike, or doing stuff with their core and their legs if they have an arm injury, or lots of other things they can do to try to maintain its training stimulus, because we want to build up their training load to be mimicking what they're going to do in a full week, right? We don't want to just give them 1 or 2 days of training and then be like, okay, now go back to 5, right? That's, again, a way too aggressive of a spike in workload. So have these conversations and think about what you're going to do, how it's going to change based on this long time period off. Maybe they can only come back to the gym a few days per week to start, but you can kind of lump things into different parts of the week, instead of having somebody just being like coming in and be like, okay, what do you want to try to do today, right? That's not a good plan. And then obviously you can have on the week to week plan, right? You can have how many weeks in a row are you going to kind of push the needle, and then when are you going to pull back, right? And sometimes in the summer, right, if I have a normal summer training, I might go a little bit longer. It might be 4 weeks that we go pretty hard. 1 week we back off. In the middle of meet season, we might have 2 weeks where we're going pretty hard and backing off because of the way the meets work, with competition, mock competition weeks. So you got to kind of have this thing. But when you come off a long period of an injury, you can't really expect someone to take this same multiple weeks in a row. Like you might have to bump back down to one really hard week and then pull back for a week, and then one really hard week and then pull back for a week. And then you can graduate up to 2 weeks and pull back a little bit. Again, their tolerance to loading is so much lower than normal after an 8-week or a 4-week break that you can't expect the body to just naturally snap back into place. Okay, and then back down to the days as we talked about, what days you do medium, what days you're doing heavy, what days you're doing light. Are you going to do strength on one day? Are you going to do cardio every day? Are you going to do flexibility one day? How about, choreography? Start plugging and playing with different options and seeing what might work based on your time, based on your coaching staff and things like that. But the athletes can also be involved in this too, right? They can have a program. What days am I doing PT? What days am I going to do my basics? What day am I going to do double bars? What day am I going to do my flexibility at home versus at the gym, right? They can have all these things in a plan. And when they're definitely in the acute part of their injury, they can use all of their downtime to start planning these things with a coach. Sit down with the coach and figure out what they can do. Don't focus on what they can't do. Okay, if you don't have all the answers, that's fine, right? You're going to probably have to pivot a lot of these things. You might have 75% of these things that are answered, but some are really unknowns. You don't know when the gym's going to be back open. You don't know when the injury is going to be fully resolved. You don't know when your meets are next year. You don't know how many coaches you're going to have for a big group or a little group, right? All these things are still sometimes up in the air. But if you can just do this a little bit, right, 50% of it or maybe 75% of it, and you can get a framework and communicate that with your parents and with the coaches, it builds a huge amount of trust, right? Saying like, hey, we're working on a plan, we have something going. The coaches are all going to work on it together. It just makes life so much easier, and it also builds a lot of good culture because the parents and the coaches and the kids all agree that you guys have the athlete's best interest in mind, but then also it allows you guys to brainstorm and kind of hear different perspectives and ideas and things of that nature. Okay, frustration is inevitable if you don't do this. And this would be my recommendations for what you can do during a long period of time off. Gymnasts, you can send them, what level do you want to work next year? What skills do you want to play around with if you're an optional, right? Write down, go through the code or go through, gymnasts that you love looking up to online and watch college routines and see what skills you might want to learn. And then once you have those skills in mind, talk with the coaches about what progressions do you have to do? What drills or things have to be mastered first? Are there baseline things that you can do at home while you're not in the gym to get yourself up to what that skill is you want to do, right? Are there certain drills and techniques and shaping things that you can do that are safe at home that eventually will get you back to those drills you need to do for that skill faster, which then progresses to what routine you want to work or what level you want to graduate up to next year. So you can kind of goal set and use this time to really brainstorm what they want to work on and keep them inspired, again, through motivation of hope for the future level, but then also hope of inspiration of what their athletes they look up to are. Gym owners can be thinking about, okay, when we get back, what's a possible schedule? What's the staff availability? What's going to be what levels versus what summer camps versus what, preschool and rec classes that can't jive really well with the team kids? How are we going to put the puzzle pieces all back together when everybody comes back in and they're all super excited, right? And then coaches working again with the gymnasts can be, are there new drills that I can learn online while I'm reading here? Are there new things I can pick up from the strength conditioning point of view that this athlete can maybe do when they're injured? Are there things in the rehab program or the PT program that I think are really interesting for flexibility or for strength and things of that nature that we can build into our entire program because maybe a lot of our kids are spraining their ankles or a lot of kids have wrist problems, okay? What are all those drills and things I can learn? Are there special circuits that I want to learn? Do I want to overhaul my strength program? Do I want to adjust the timelines of when we're working on certain athletic qualities like strength versus power because now maybe I have 4 months to work with for their preseason if the athlete gets hurt at states and they can't come back for nationals or regionals or their season ends and they're going to have 5 months. Well, maybe they can get a head start on their strength program or some new stuff to get them in better physical shape when they come back. Okay, so all these things can be thought about before or during the time that you have off. This is me personally for what I usually think about, right? So say if we have an athlete that's injured or we have a forced time off or, for some reason we had, I think last year it was that we had one athlete who mom and dad were like, nope, we've been planning this trip to France for, 3 years and we're going to see our great aunt or whatever it is. And they were like, we're going to be gone for 6 weeks. I was like, okay, that is what it is. You know what I mean? I'm not going to argue it. It's your decision. But I was thinking about on the way back about this athlete getting back. So I was like, that's a long time. Okay. So I was thinking, okay, it's going to be 1 to 2 times of a double time period to get them slowly back up because of how much time they were off. So I'm probably estimating it's going to be 6 weeks minimum, 12 weeks to get them back to a full quote unquote training. And I see that as can do all of the impact load that we want them to do. They can do harder surfaces. They're training, pretty challenging multiple weeks in a row. And they've kind of earned the right to push real hard in that 5th gear, right? That's what I'm thinking of. I think that it's unrealistic to think that it's going to take 12 weeks for someone to go from like no level of training to basic tumbling passes. That's not what we're talking about. But we want somebody in fighting shape, like they say. We want somebody who's ready to rumble, full gears, doesn't have a negative response, and is really, enjoying a high level of hard training and is pushing the envelope for their skills. So that's what I think about. It's kind of like 1 to 2 times the training period. And I always, like I said, I reduced the higher loading weeks. So I might go 2 weeks on for that athlete. I might say like, hey, you're going to come back after this injury or after this trip. We're going to focus on doing one really hard training week, and then we might back you off a little bit for the first week, because everybody else has, been here and has done a lot of hard training. And it's just the way it is. You're just a little bit, in a different boat here. And so if we back off your numbers a little bit because you haven't done this in a long time, there's been many times when either after an injury or after, like I said, that long 6-week break, we'll be in the middle of a routine, routine construction point of view, like, okay, everybody else is doing parts or half sets or going through sprint throughs and stuff like that. But, Sarah, you just came back from vacation. I just want you to get the rust out for this week. I just want you to do basics and swing. Let's get your skills back. Let's, when everybody else goes and starts doing hard tumbling on the floor, let's maybe do a few passes basic, but then hop over to the pit and do a couple of things there. Like, don't make it a negative thing for the athlete. Just say like, hey, it's just different. Everybody has different ebbs and flows. Then over the course of 2 weeks, we'll wean you back in slowly or things of that nature. Okay. And then, like I said, I might have that athlete do 2 heavy days, and instead of doing the other harder days, they might do a couple more basic days. And this especially comes up with athletes that have lower body injuries. They can't really tolerate the level of plyometric impact that the other athletes maybe can, because they haven't done it. So, in the strength conditioning binders that we have when we write programs, there might be a lot of plyometrics. And for that athlete who can't do lower body, I'll just switch their exercises for a couple weeks. Say, hey, like when everybody else does, box jumps, or when everybody else does plyometrics, really aggressive plyos over barrels or on harder surfaces, I want you to hop over to tumble track and just give me, 10 split jumps on each side, or a bounce front tuck all the way down. You can do that same similar volume, but at a lighter intensity, because the surface is different. So a lot of those different situations come up, but especially after a long time period off, you cannot expect an athlete to come back and be jumping right into the strength, the conditioning, the high skill volume, the numbers of skills, the intensity of surfaces they're working on. Like, you really have to respect that, or else you're going to have somebody who has a delayed onset of cranky shins and cranky elbows and stuff like that. Okay. And then personally, usually when those athletes come back, I say the first month is really just a lot of physical prep, a lot of basics. If other athletes are doing high numbers and stuff like that, then I say it's, you're going to be doing more of the basic complexes and the skills and drills. If it's a situation where the whole gym is forced out because of some reasons that we're talking about now, you plan for 1 month of kind of grunt work, you know what I mean, with softer surfaces, maybe a little bit more spotting, maybe more, softer pit tumbling and things of that nature, or padded beam covers, or P-bar rails with upper bar support so that the impacts aren't so hard. Maybe getting the buck horse down there and doing much more low pommel horse work as compared to real hard impact stuff. Just ideas, but then you can move your way up over the course of time after that first month. Okay, I strongly suggest that people use tracking during this time. Okay, so this is the thing we've talked about before, and this is an available resource in the download section, but sleeping 1 to 10, energy levels 1 to 10, mood 1 to 10, and muscular readiness 1 to 10. So sleep 0 to 10, how well did you sleep last night? That usually captures numbers and quality. Energy levels, 1 is I feel dead, I'm super tired. 10 is I feel like I'm a rocket ship, I'm ready to go. 1, worst mood, grumpy, poor attitude, don't want to be here, this is grumpy. 10 is like, Pippi Longstockings, ready to roll. And then you multiply that and you can get it at a 40, right? So that'll give you a wellness score. But I think this really helps to get an index of how the athletes are feeling every day, how they're responding to the day before in their training loads. Okay, you can also use rate of perceived exertion. Okay, so that is an RPE, rate of perceived exertion, is kind of a 1 to 10 scale of how hard they think something is. So sometimes people will do this for specific exercises or specific events, but in the easiest way to do this is just doing a rate of perceived exertion times their time in the gym. So say, for example, they have a 7 out of a 10. It was a pretty hard practice. They're in the gym for 3 hours, which is 180 minutes. That would be 1,260 arbitrary units, right? And it's not perfect. It's not it's not like an exact thing, right? It doesn't replace your normal coaching intuition or what you're going to change or do, but it's a really good guide. So if the athletes can, before they come out, they can do their numbers, their 1 to 10s, and then they can do their rates after, right? They can multiply them real quick before they go home for practice. And you can just look over the trend of a week. You can look for those patterns we're talking about of like slowly increasing with light, medium, and heavy days. Like the lighter days and the off days are obviously much lower numbers, but the heavier days are higher. And you should see the numbers over the course of week to week kind of bump up. And I think it really helps the athletes take care of their own training, but it also is a good way for conversations to happen between coaches. Like, hey, I noticed the sleep was kind of like a 5 the last 3 days. Everything all right? Like, you okay? Like, oh man, I'm just, something's got me up late at night, or blah, blah, blah. Or they look at their soreness, and maybe it's a time when you should be recovered. You're on a deload week, but they're still really sore. Like, hey, why are you so sore? Why are you in such a grumpy mood? Is there something we can kind of fix or talk about? Or do you need to do something at home? And, it really helps to open that door. And the other thing, I think I have it in here. Nope, sorry, I don't. But this on the 1260 is, like I said, you can count that week to week and you can slowly build that up over time to look at those ratios we talked about. Look at like 1260 compared to the 2 weeks before, the average, right? If you took 10,000, right, in the whole training load week, if 10,000 of that acute load, you compared that to 2 weeks before and it was 8,000, then you're right on mark, right? That's slightly above. That's like 1.2 or 1.3 as you bump up to 12, 13, 14, whatever it is. So you can track those things a little bit. Okay. I would agree that it is important to care about the athletes, but we are notorious in gymnastics for looking out for the athletes way more than we look out for ourselves. Okay. So I think we really need to be careful as coaches that we're not draining ourselves too much, right? When you have that, forced time off, or say you take a long time off for a couple weeks or a couple months for whatever reason it is, or you have other obligations, you have to realize how draining it is to get back to coaching full time and really being at your best. So physically, we know you're on your feet, you're spotting, you're moving around, you're sweating, you're getting going, right? Mentally, you have lots of things you have to help people with. So whether that's, thinking about routines and constructions and watching corrections and really doing the brain power that comes with coaching, or just emotionally, right? Especially if an athlete is injured and is coming back, or you have a lot of people who are coming back to the gym after a long tired. You're gonna have a lot of people who are like, oh, this is so hard. I'm so tired, right? And you're gonna have to really have emotional intelligence and an emotional bandwidth to be level-headed and not be a little bit trigger finger for people complaining. You have to really kind of have that bandwidth to be resilient there against all these people maybe having a tough time. And the reality is that if you're getting back after a long break, especially if the gym is closed like we're having now, it's gonna be a lot of emotions flaring up, man. There's gonna be a lot of people who are frustrated with the lack of skill progress, who are really having a tough time getting the rust out of the gears. And obviously you as a coach too, it's gonna be hard, but you as a leader, it's really, really hard. It's really important for you guys to kind of get back there. Okay, so things that you have to kind of think about. Obviously, if you are the one with time off, try to think about these things. But as you transition back and you're getting more into that stress level building up again, right? Think about these basics, right? Are you sleeping 7 to 8 hours? Are you eating well 90 to 95% of the time? Are you drinking 6 to 8 bottles of water per day? Are you disciplined with your technology and you're not spending 5 hours on social media being, comparative or doing negative mindset things? Are you building out time in your schedule for the things that you really love? Or are you just burying yourself in coaching hours and work because now that you're back at the gym, you feel like you got to make up time, right? And also you spending time with the people that you love. I think that all those things are research supported to increase wellness and happiness. And I think we're all very guilty of caring so much about the athletes, and rightfully so, or, I guess with good intentions, trying to do what's best for them, right? But, working 60 hours, 70 hours and burying ourselves into the ground just to the effort of somebody else's happiness is not a good idea. And it will ultimately always come down where you can't deliver the best service or your high quality coaching ability because you're running yourself into the ground. Hey, this is the RP I was looking at, but I knew it was in here. Just kind of mix the slides up by accident. So this is when you would look at the, total week you would have here for a day, right? If you multiplied 180 minutes times 6 out of 10 to get this, and you would build this here. Sometimes we model these for college athletes, and this is from a graph that I did for somebody else. So they had a morning session. You could add that with the afternoon session, but whatever length you have, RPE you have, the point is that it gives you a number at the end of the week, 760, 80 here, that you can start comparing week to week. So you can easily make this in an Excel spreadsheet or just do it in a binder over the course of a couple months. The thing is that you need 3 weeks to kind of really go with, right? 2 weeks building up to make the average of the 2 weeks, and then you compare it to the third week, which would be the acute load based on the chronic load. Okay, number 8, my parting wisdom here. Keep perspective at all times. I think that with extended time period off from an injury, it's very hard. It's very easy to get down in the dumps and be upset about it. But remember, gymnastics is a luxury, right? Health is always more important. There are many other things. Like I said, there's times when families say, no, we have a really important trip and we're going away for a month because it's the one time we get together, and we do it every 2 years and this and that. And, family and time like that, those things are very important, and they're very, very crucial to a happy life. And so we have to remember that gymnastics is a luxury, and that men's choice is a choice. And for not everybody, it's their first priority. Some kids like gymnastics and it's fun, but it's not the number one thing they're going to die for. So you have to make sure that their goals are reflective of how they're involved in the sport. And I think that sometimes we really lose that gratitude and perspective, right? We say, oh, this is the worst case scenario and why me and things like that. But there's always a silver lining, and you can't always say it. And it doesn't mean you should ignore the reality, but there always is something to find, right? And so I always have these conversations. Yep, injuries are definitely stinky and they're not fun, but you're lucky that you can heal. You're lucky you have a medical system to get better. And, if you have a surgery, especially, you're lucky you have that great surgeon who helped you. And, this is definitely bad. There's some situations where like, this is bad, right? I broke my leg. This is not fun. I have 6 months I have to rest and stuff like that. It's like, yep, but there's still plenty of stuff we can work on. There's plenty of ways to get better and things of that nature. Forced time's not great, but there's always a way to get better and get back into the swing of things. And then, time away from our group and our family is awful, but, it makes us grateful for our community we have, and it really makes us love why we do this in the first place. So hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope that was helpful for these, again, where we're at now, coronavirus. I hope this helps you get your brain turning for the next month that we might have to kind of grit our teeth through here and get you ready and fired up for the back. If this is something you're viewing because somebody has an injury or because you're having time off, I hope that the principles still here are very helpful, because if you can do it during this time, you can really gain the insight into how to do it every time, which is what we want. We want systems that are going to help people time and time again. If you guys have questions, chime in on the Facebook page, email me, let me know what you think, and I will see you guys inside the webinars.